Okay, good evening, everybody. We'll go ahead and return to our regular schedule, regular session, I should say, of the Auburn City Council for July 13th, 2020. We do have some reportable action out of closed session. So tonight, the City Council in closed session approved MOU extensions for the following barn units. The first three MOU extensions are through December 31st, 2020, and those were agreements with the Auburn Police Officers Association, the Auburn Firefighters Association, IAFF, and the Auburn Public Safety Association, sworn and non-sworn. We also approved a side letter agreement with the Auburn Employees Association for an MOU 2% salary deferral. Side letter agreements are available, or let me rephrase that, will be available on the city's website. And if anybody from the public would like to see the side letter agreements, they are available through the city clerk. Tonight, the City Council also reached an agreement with the following unrepresented groups, the police lieutenants and the confidential employees, both of them with a 2% deferred salary. Resolutions for these agreements will come back to the full City Council for approval. Moving on, I will go ahead and ask the City Clerk to please take the roll.
Councilmember Dowden Calvillo.
Present.
Amara.
Present.
Mackey.
Here.
Oakley.
Here.
And Mayor Berlant.
And I am here as well. Thank you, Amy. If you'll all join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, the first item that we have on our agenda is mayor's accommodations, and I do have a accommodation tonight. Hopefully we have a guest to join us to accept this accommodation. And while we work to add her to the, do we have Renee with us? Yes, we do.
Yes.
Renee, good evening. Can you hear and see us?
Yes, I just keep going out, but I'm on right now.
Great. Well, welcome. Thank you. So for those of you who don't know, Renee Berg has organized and set up Auburn Community Service Day. So I'll read the whereases for everybody. Whereas Auburn Community Service Day has beautified and cleaned the greater Auburn area for 6 years in a row. And whereas the purpose of Auburn Community Service Day is to support and improve the high quality of life in Auburn, California by engaging our collective time, skills, and talents to better connect the people of Auburn and promote pride in our community. And whereas each year, nearly 100 volunteers spend the day planting flowers, cutting weeds, trimming bushes, cleaning, painting, and beautifying our community. And whereas dozens of locations over the years have benefited from these efforts, including Acres of Hope, School Park Preserve, the Auburn Community Garden, Old Town and Downtown Auburn, the Chinese Cemetery, Auburn Joss House, Placer Nature Center, EVK Middle School, Placer High School, Gold Coast Fairgrounds, as well as the Armed Forces Community Garden and various fuel reduction locations, and probably a whole laundry list. Even though I thought I named everybody, there's probably plenty more, Renee. So therefore, I, Daniel Berlant, Mayor of the City of Auburn, on behalf of the City Council, commend the work of everyone involved in organizing this event and making Auburn a better place to live and do business. So Renee, to you and the organizers and all the volunteers.
Yay.
And I'll show real quick, here is the actual accommodation, Renee, for you and the event. But if you want to maybe say a few words, go ahead.
There she goes.
I'm back. There's chaos at my house. Someone knocked on the door and the dogs are barking. So anyhow, I wanted to thank you, Daniel. Thank you, City of Auburn, for this accommodation. I'm very proud of this event. We actually back in 2014, I came to Cheryl Peterson, who was with ARD at the time, with this idea, and she was all for it. And so we started moving forward. And so October of 2015 was our first event, and Daniel jumped on board immediately. So he's been with us on our committee since the beginning. And then right after that, I just wanted to thank Cynthia Woods and Katie Freeze, Brian Freeze, Ken Tokotomi. And then we've had great support from the police department, the fire department, and just a ton of volunteers. There's been one I want to call out, Tammy Tavari. She's volunteered every year for this event, and just a lot of others. Lisa Bell, her and her children come. Just, it's a great family event to, beautify, like Daniel said, our community. And I mean, I love Auburn, and a lot of people love Auburn, and it's a beautiful place to live. And thank you so much for this accommodation.
Thank you, Renee, very much. And, I know several of the council members as well have volunteered over the years to the event.
Yep.
I got to say that you did a great job, keeping this event going despite all the hurdles in right now. And I'll note for the group that even with COVID-19, even with all of the restrictions that the event had to take, there was still well over 80 participants. In fact, I think it's almost 90 participants showed up and volunteered. So still a pretty good turnout, to say the least. So thank you, Renee, for being here today.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a great event this year, so it's good. Thank you.
Thanks.
We'll make sure, Renee, to get that resolution in the mail to you. So
Congrats.
Thank
have a good
you.
evening, Renee. Thanks for joining us.
You too.
We will move on to our agenda approval. This is the time for council members and or the public to ask for the removal, postponement, or change to the listed sequence of an agenda item. The agenda will be approved by the roll call of the council. Any request by the council to make a change? Okay, seeing none. Amy, any changes from the public requested?
No, there's not.
Okay, with that, then I will ask for a motion for approval.
Move approval of the agenda.
I'll second.
Okay, great. Amy, if you don't mind, please take the roll.
Councilmember Dowden Calvillo,
Aye.
Amara,
Yes.
Mackey,
Aye.
Stokely,
Yes.
Mayor Berlant.
And I'm an aye. Thank you very much. Next item here, consent calendar. All matters listed under the consent calendar are considered to be routine in nature and will be approved by one blanket motion with a roll call vote. There will be no separate discussions of these items unless persons request specific items to be removed from the consent calendar for discussion and separate action. Any items removed will be considered after the motion to approve the consent calendar. Are there any requests by the council to remove? Okay, I'll ask the city clerk, is there anybody from the public who's asked for an item to be removed?
There's not.
Okay, with that, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move to approve the consent calendar as submitted.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Amy, would you please take the roll?
Councilmember Dowden Calvillo,
Aye.
Amara,
Yes.
Mackey,
Aye.
Stokely,
Yes.
Mayor Berlant.
And I am an aye. Consent calendar passes. I'll just take a quick moment, though, to congratulate Councilwoman Amara on her appointment now to represent us on the Placer County Mosquito and Vector Control Board, as well as Steve Hyatt to our Planning Commission. So to you, Sandy, and to Steve, congratulations on some additional efforts to help the city. That ends the consent calendar. So we'll move to item 6, public comment. This is the time provided to the public so that they may speak to the council on any item that is not on the agenda. We ask that the comments be as brief as possible. Of course, we are still under the governor's executive order due to COVID-19, and so we are accepting public comment via email as well as telephone. Both of those were posted on the agenda, and so those will be heard here. With that, I will go ahead and turn it over to the city clerk to walk us through public comment. Actually, I'm sorry, first, is there anybody from the city council that would like to make a public comment?
I would like to make a public comment.
Councilwoman Downing Calvillo, go ahead.
Yes, as you know, the governor issued a new mandate for those of us on the watch list, which includes Placer County and Sacramento County, and I believe 27 other counties where we now are no longer allowed to have personal services, businesses open, places of worship if they're indoors, gyms and fitness centers, offices that do not provide critical services. These are all activities that are now prohibited. I look forward to our next meeting on Friday with the different business associations so that we can come up with even more creative ways to allow these businesses to somehow, hopefully, continue to provide some type of service outside. The governor was very clear in that he kept pushing outside, what we can do outside. So I think that we will just need to be creative, and I'm committed to doing whatever we can for our businesses. So as we move forward, and it looks like this will be the situation for us for the next 3 weeks or so, at which time the governor will reevaluate, and we'll see what happens then. But in the meantime, I'm sure my colleagues agree that we need to move forward and work with our businesses to help mitigate this next phase in COVID-19.
Thank you very much for that, Councilwoman Down in Calvillo. And yes, I think when we get into the COVID-19 update, we'll ask our city manager to update us a little bit on some of the discussions we had on Friday with our business associations related to specifically outdoor dining and expanding opportunities to go outside. When we talked on Friday, that was in anticipation for what then occurred on Saturday and then again today. So more to come as well. So for those of you who are interested, and again, I will note too that in our consent calendar, we did approve the local state of emergency due to COVID-19. So thank you very much for those comments. Any other comments from the council? Not seeing any, I'll go ahead and turn it to the city clerk for public comment.
Sure, I received one public comment to the public comment email address that we have assigned. And here it is. And that completes public comment.
Great, thank you very much, Amy. I will note that our city clerk did refer the commenter to the Auburn Recreation District, and I will be following up tomorrow with him with a phone call as well to make sure that he knows that there is a Parks Department, which is a subsequent email, but the Auburn Recreation District can hopefully answer his question. Moving on to council business, item number 7, informational presentation by PG&E. And I think, Amy, I am doing intro to this. So tonight, we're going to be joined here as Amy adds him in with Brandon Sanders from the Pacific Gas and Electric Company to just give us an overview of their efforts to reduce the wildfire risk in our community, as well as actions that hopefully they've taken to better prepare our community for the public safety power shutoffs as well. So Brandon, I'll turn it over to you, and we look forward to you giving us a little bit more, and we appreciate you spending the evening with us.
Of course. Thank you, Mayor Belant and council members. Can I confirm that y'all can hear me clearly?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, my name is Brandon Sanders. I'm the Sierra Division Public Affairs Representative for Pacific Gas and Electric Company, essentially the liaison to local governments such as cities, counties, and the like. Here this evening with a presentation for you around PG&E's efforts to reduce wildfire risk and the methods and approaches we're taking to do that. So if I may, I'd like to go ahead and share my screen, and I'll bring up the slide presentation that we've prepared for you, and we'll work through that. And of course, happy to answer questions at any point during the presentation, but also of course at the conclusion. So can I confirm that everyone can see the presentation?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. Quickly, just to begin, PG&E begins every conversation with safety. It's our culture. Just want to reaffirm with the council and the public that we are continuing to operate our system in a safe and reliable manner despite the COVID situation. We have all essential personnel operating in those functions continuously since the onset of the event. We have taken precautions for our employees who were able to work from home. We are encouraging them to do so. And of course, deploying the guidance to our field operations personnel so that they are sure to continue to operate and do their work safely in light of the COVID pandemic. There are really three components to what we're trying to achieve as we approach wildfire season. The first of those is to basically reduce wildfire potential. We are being very aggressive in terms of increasing and enhancing the number and frequency of inspections. We are doing a lot around system automation and hardening. And of course, public safety power shutoff is a very effective tool in reducing that risk of ignition from electrical equipment during high wind events and extreme fire threat. Additionally, we are deploying some of the latest in technology as far as weather stations and high definition cameras. We've established what we're calling our Wildfire Safety Operations Center out of our general office in San Francisco, which some of you may have heard will be moving to Oakland in the coming years. Additionally, we have greatly enhanced our capabilities around meteorology, and we have some very high-level professionals working in that space for PG&E in the interest of securing accurate data as we approach fire season. And most importantly, we want to reduce the impact of the PSPS events themselves. We have stated goals of essentially making these events smaller, shorter, and smarter, which I'll cover later in the presentation. We are working hard to improve coordination with the communities we serve, from everything from public safety professionals to local governments, community-based organizations and nonprofits, the access and functional needs community, and many others. This is a high-level overview of the system, if you will. We have 5.5 million customers. About 10% of those are located in that high fire threat district as defined by the mapping produced by the CPUC in concert with CAL FIRE. It's a very, very extensive system with 81,000 miles of distribution and 25,000 of transmission. This kind of gives you an idea here of what's included in that high fire threat district, which is roughly 25,000 miles of circuit on the distribution side and 5,500 on the transmission side. And these are basically circuits that traverse those highest threat areas. This is an illustration of the CPUC map overlaid with the city of Auburn. As you can see, the city center itself along the 80 corridor and north and south on 49 down through Auburn Folsom Road is sort of an island inside of this polygon of high fire threat. What you see around Auburn is what's described as Tier 2, which is an elevated fire threat. And that really plays in closely to our decisions around where we do the hardening and of course, where we deploy PSPS as well. This is an expanded view of the entire county. As you can see, that mid-elevation band in the upper foothills is really the area of highest concern, the Tier 3, or what we're framing as the extreme fire threat areas, basically from Colfax east. And then you can see clearly here, looking at areas east of Lincoln and north of Auburn, there's the tier 2 elevated risk. And we're focusing a lot of our efforts on emplacing equipment and doing work around hardening and whatnot that is going to allow us to retain essential services and in electricity service during PSPS events in Auburn proper. We're being very aggressive on enhancements to our system. We have to be. We know we need to do more, and we're doing that as exhibited here in these figures. We are deploying sectionalizing devices, which I'll cover in greater detail. We're doing switching schemes that are going to allow us to reduce the impact and scope of PSPS. We are actively working with the county and others to establish community resource center sites where individual customers can seek services during PSPS events. We're rapidly approaching one of the larger weather station systems in the region, as well as deploying high definition cameras. The important thing to note here is those weather stations and the data associated with those is available to the public, and I'll get into more detail on that as well. I'm sure everyone in Auburn and Placer County has seen just a veritable army of tree trucks on the move, doing veg work all over the area. We're being very aggressive on our enhanced vegetation management work. And of course, doing a lot around system hardening. For anyone that was driving on Ophir Road today, you could have observed PG&E crews replacing wood poles with tubular steel poles, which is going to make that particular circuit coming out of Wise Powerhouse far more resilient against high winds off into the future. So that's one example that you can see in real time if you just drive down Ophir Road. This slide touches on system hardening and resiliency, sort of along the lines of what I described was occurring on Ophir Road today and will continue throughout the week. We're installing stronger poles, coated power lines where typically this industry standard was uncoated conductor. We're installing insulated conductor in areas where it makes sense given the risk from falling vegetation. We're replacing equipment in various ways to further reduce the risk to our system. And we're conducting greatly enhanced and more frequent inspections of all portions of the system in those tier 2 and tier 3 areas. And please stop me at any time if there are questions. This is a side-by-side comparison of our vegetation management protocol. Typically, the state standard requires that PG&E maintain a 4-foot radial clearance around our conductor on the distribution system. There's far greater clearances that occur on the transmission side, given federal and state standards around that. But this is an illustration on the left of what PG&E would typically look to achieve. Oftentimes, individuals will ask, well, if the clearance requirement is only 4 feet, why are you cutting out to 12 or 15 feet? And the simple answer to that is that we need to maintain that clearance over the course of the growing season. The last thing we want to be doing is re-entering individuals' property repeatedly throughout the year to cut back that vegetation, disturbing the ground, disturbing the residents. What we're really looking to achieve now, as illustrated on the right-hand side of the slide, is a greater clearance out to 12 feet, and more importantly, looking to remove all vegetation from the conductor to the sky, which greatly mitigates against the risk of falling branches onto that conductor. And that's subsequently what oftentimes causes fires from electrical circuits. This is a real-time illustration of what we've deployed in the field here in Placer County as it relates to weather stations. We are going to be doing more and more of this as time goes on. The intent is to have a weather station every 20 circuit miles. What this is going to allow us to do is maintain a much more granular view of what the conditions are in the field so that we can be smarter again about how we deploy things like PSPS and where we identify the risk to be highest and take subsequent action around that data. So I'll just allow folks to take a quick look at the distribution of those. This is in conjunction with existing weather system stations that occur with our partner agencies, and we definitely all share information in real time. One thing I would like to point out is if you go to pge.com/weather, you can not only find the data from these specific stations, but additionally, there is a 7-day outlook for PSPS that's updated daily. So if you see something such as news media coverage around a red flag event, and you're concerned about the possibility of a PSPS in the week ahead, you can go to pge.com/weather. And on that website, we will have a live updated forecast of PSPS projections by division. We've also installed high definition cameras that are not only being used by PG&E to assess field conditions, but they're also widely available to first responders and the media. This is an illustration of those that we've got deployed here in Placer County. As you can see, we have one in North Auburn. And as you travel up the 80 corridor, there are a few more. And I would encourage everyone to, again, visit either pge.com/weather or alertwildfire.org. And you can find those live feeds from those cameras. And I know many of you probably follow Ubinet. That's one of the many media outlets that's utilizing those cameras in real time as fire events come about. The intent is to increase our coverage to 90% of our service area by 2022. So let's speak in more detail about the public safety power shutoff. Really, the intent here is to either mitigate or eliminate or lessen the risk of a wildfire that's caused by a failed electrical conductor. This can happen in a variety of ways: wind impacts to the equipment, vegetation contact with the equipment. And oftentimes what we see with vegetation contact is there's material that could be coming from outside of our right-of-way that typically wouldn't be in scope. So we're really looking to identify dead and dying trees, working closely with Placer County in the tree mortality space and very aggressive on removals around that space. We also have the intent of again, clearing those conductors to the sky to reduce that risk. This is an important tool for PG&E to deploy, and we understand it makes for a very challenging situation, but it's effective and it does work. And I've got illustrations of that later in the program. This is really the nuts and bolts of the whole issue. So PG&E has a stated goal that comes in 3 parts. We intend to make PSPS smaller, we intend to make PSPS shorter, and we intend to make PSPS smarter. And we're going to get into some greater detail around that, but it involves in deploying modern equipment that's state of the art and allows us to operate the grid in a more nimble and flexible way. Resources are a critical part of making them shorter, as we need to patrol those circuits in full detail before we turn the power back on. And again, making it smarter. So that's a combination of meteorology, communications, collaboration with our local government partners, and also definitely being mindful of the needs of those who have medical sensitivities. And we are doing a lot in that space, which I'll discuss in greater detail. I know many of you are very aware of this, but hopefully for the sake of your constituency that are watching today, this is a general overview of the criteria that are considered when a PSPS is potentially going to happen. A red flag warning is an indicator of elevated risk, but it's not just the red flag warning that PG&E looks at when we talk about PSPS. We're talking about low humidity, generally below 20%, forecasted sustained winds in high risk areas as dictated by the CPUC map that's produced, those tier 2 and tier 3 designations. Fuel conditions on the ground, how dry is the fuel? How deep and dense is the fuel in a given area? And of course, we have people all over the territory every day feeding back real-time observations from the field to our Wildfire Safety Operations Center. We have very much focused on customer outreach around PSPS. There's a lot going on in that space. This gives you an idea of our intentions as far as communication with customers prior, during, and after a PSPS event. We are targeting a 2-day notice when we see those conditions as imminent and the potential for a PSPS coming about. We're going to be communicating with them in real time up to the actual de-energization, providing information during the PSPS event in a number of ways, through our web presence, through direct outreach to customers, through the CRCs or community resource centers, where they'll be able to find information. And then of course, providing estimated times of restoration for those impacted customers. And also just being sure that they've got information to notify them that the event is past and that their energy is now flowing once again, and they can sort of take a breath and know that the event has passed. We'll also be, of course, doing basic, media and those types of things, kind of the conventional communication methods that most emergency responders or utilities employ when these types of events arise. So a lot of the feedback we received last year centered around, why is it taking so long to get the power back on? There's no more wind. My neighbor, my family member, for example, a different part of the county has their power restored. Why is it taking so long for mine? And this gives you a detailed overview of what's involved in restoring customers. So once we have that weather all clear, we know from the meteorology group that the high risk factors have subsided. We have to physically patrol and inspect every affected circuit to ensure that it's intact before we re-energize. If we were to go ahead and just turn everything back on when the winds had passed, not knowing if everything was still intact and viable, that could essentially result in the exact thing we were trying to avoid, which is a wildfire. So we have crews on the ground, in trucks, on foot, in ATVs. We also have helicopters and LiDAR equipped airplanes that can do surveys at night. A lot of that has been greatly enhanced, and the numbers of those resources are near double as what they were last year. And then we find damage. There was quite a bit of extensive damage on the system in Placer County last year during PSPS season. And we do have documentation around that. I have a couple of images I'll share later that kind of speak to that. And then of course, when the control center has communications from the field that the circuit's intact, they will then employ switching schemes and re-energize those circuits in a step restoration fashion, where instead of waiting to patrol the whole circuit before we re-energize, we're going to be doing that in pieces. as the equipment is determined to be intact and viable. And then, of course, we'll notify customers once the event has passed and power has been restored. So I'd like to touch briefly on customer resources that we have available for our affected customers in your constituency. There's a lot of information on this slide, but I think the most important thing to note is that PG&E is working hard to make sure that folks have access to essential needs and resources during a PSPS event. Last year, we deployed community resource centers in a variety of locations, including Auburn at the Gold Country Fairgrounds. We now have contracts with the Gold Country Fairgrounds, among others, to quickly deploy these resource centers and if the need arises. And we're expanding the offerings that we're going to be providing at these centers so that customers can have at least some semblance of normalcy and the access to resources they need to get through these PSPS events. Of course, general needs such as heating and cooling and Wi-Fi, charging opportunities for their, whether it's durable medical equipment or IT equipment such as laptops, things people need for their day-to-day work and life. But we're also going to be adding a few things. We're going to be providing some just basic nourishment, bottled water, and being sure that we have security in place to not only ensure the safety of our customers, but also that of our employees who are working at those locations. One thing I wanted to touch on briefly, as you can see on the right, we are taking COVID into consideration as we develop our planning around CRCs, and we have a plan in place if the need arises to deploy these in a sense and through the lens of COVID, where social distancing is possible, requiring masks, providing masks if folks come without them. So we're actually very focused on the possibility of finding ourselves in a COVID state as we deploy these community resource centers, and we have a playbook around that should the need arise. This is a great piece of information that I would kindly ask for you to share with your constituents. We are hosting a series of webinars. These are customer facing, so you can see August 12th and August 19th. If individuals were to visit pge.com/wildfire safety, they can find the information to access these webinars. And it's going to provide quite a bit of detail in similar fashion to what I'm providing with you here. But that'll be more customer focused, and it'll really drill down on individual customer needs and give a broad overview of what's available to customers in terms of resources during the PSPS event. We have some really good information on our website. I would highly encourage you all to share this with your constituency and friends, family, business associates, and whatnot. Of course, to get updates themselves, pge.com/PSPS updates. All of the weather data, including that 7-day outlook, is available at pge.com/weather. There's information on backup power, and most importantly, the safety issues associated with utilizing a generator for your home. We want people to know that to use a generator to power your home, it needs to be done properly. Otherwise, it could potentially backfeed into the system and seriously injure one of our line workers in the field. So it's very important that you visit this website if you have a backup generator and ensure that it's installed properly to eliminate risk to our line workers who are trying to restore power. We have our Safety Action Center. It's relatively new, a plethora of resources there for our customers, and I really encourage folks to take a look at that. And then a PSPS specific website with Preparedness Resources at prepareforpowerdown.com. And I do believe that that's being done in partnership with many of our state and local partners as well. This is just a listing of some additional information if constituents or members of council would like to further educate themselves on the various things that not only PG&E but various levels of government are doing to address these issues. There's quite a bit of information there. That I think is available on your website for folks that access the agenda, so I won't belabor those, but a lot of good information there. And that concludes my presentation, but there are a couple more slides here I just want to jump to quickly. So this is just for the city of Auburn, an overview of the number of customers impacted. It varied substantially, and I do think that we're going to see much smaller numbers this year because we have done a lot around installing sectionalizing devices. These are basically circuit breakers that we can turn on or off to isolate power flowing out of the city of Auburn into the more rural areas, which is going to reduce the impacts to city residents. I'm confident in that, and I stand by it, and I look forward to seeing what the results are coming out of that work. It's occurring now, and it's very dynamic, and we're being very aggressive on doing everything we can to reduce impacts. And then this is just a few examples of situations where there was documented damage, and this is just a couple of them. But it's a very real threat. As you can see, there were no trees or overhangs on those conductors, and yet we still saw wind-blown vegetation coming into those wires. And so that's why we're really being very aggressive on vegetation management. We really ask our customers to work with the tree crews that might arrive on their property. It's important work and it needs to get done. And it's clearly exhibited here that it doesn't have to be something hanging over the conductor, high enough winds that could blow it from out of the right of way into the wire. So Mayor Ballant, thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Brandon, for joining us this evening in the very informational presentation. I'll go ahead and open up to the council to see if there's any questions. Councilmember Spokley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Berlant. Brandon, thank you very much for the presentation. Obviously, as you stated in your presentation, the pandemic is at the top of mind, but literally right before the pandemic struck, we were all focused on these public safety power shutoffs and the impacts to our business districts. Can you give us a little more detail on where you are with the microgridding that we understand PG&E is working on in our Old Town and downtown districts?
So I do know that there is a playbook for microgrid temporary generation in Forest Hill and Colfax. What I understand is that the sectionalizing work that we're doing is going to greatly diminish impacts to Auburn Central. But I would need to get back with the program team, sir, and validate that work. I have a map. It's actually not on this computer that shows the installation of the sectionalizing devices throughout Auburn. There are several that have gone in. I know that there was one in particular that then Mayor Mackey brought to my attention on Racetrack Street that we decided to put on a pole right in front of somebody's picture window overlooking the courthouse. We actually relocated that, but that was one of those sectionalizing devices that's going to reduce the impacts in that neighborhood, generally around the recreation center. So I can get you that map, sir. It shows where all the sectionalizing devices are located, and that is going to be the biggest benefit. I don't think, I'm not aware of a plan myself to install temporary generation in Auburn. I do believe the intent is that installing these sectionalizing devices will greatly mitigate the impacts for central Auburn, if you will.
So Brandon, I understand that you don't necessarily have all the information, but I'll fire a few questions at you because my understanding was that there's two primary feeds that serve our business districts. One comes from north of town, the other comes from south of town where I live. And the problematic circuit was one coming from south of town. The idea was to try to figure out how to microgrid around our downtown and old town business districts to eliminate the dependency on the south feed, because that one comes, through the canyon and is more prone to longer term shutoffs. I know you've heard this from us before, but it's completely unacceptable that we have one side of our business district that has full power and the other side of the street, literally the other side of the street, is out of power for 3 or 4 days. I've had businesses, Brandon, who have called me saying, we're done, we're looking for another space, we're leaving Auburn, we're moving down to Roseville, where Roseville Electric has a stabilized system with less problems. So please look into that and please report back to us, if you would, on where we're at with that microgridding for our business districts. Do you happen to know, Brandon, how many circuits serve the city proper, the city of Auburn? Are we talking dozens? Are we talking a couple? Do you know that information, Brandon?
Well, for transmission level circuits that high voltage feed into the substations, I believe there would maybe be less than a half dozen.
Okay.
But Councilman, I would be happy to set aside some time, speak with you and perhaps one of your peers on the council to really dive deep. I can bring in a specialist from the electric operations group that we can review the mapping. You can point out to us specifically the areas of concern, and I can essentially get you information as to what we can and can't do for those particular customers, I'd be happy to convene a meeting so we can really just sit down and look at maps with the electrical professionals, because I'm not an engineer. I understand it in general terms and I'm able to speak to it generally, but to do the mapping and really identify where it's coming from and who's affected, I would need to ask for a separate conversation around that.
Okay, and I understand that, Brandon. Thank you very much. I do have one final question, and I think this is probably for the engineers or whoever, but one of the other big complaints that I heard through our last summer season and the shutoffs that we had was certain cell providers seem to have no secondary backup to their towers. So literally whole sectors of the city would lose cell service. Does PG&E have any role in backup generation for critical facilities like cell towers, or is that solely the responsibility of the cell providers?
As a company, we're working very closely with the telecoms. That's something that's sort of being facilitated by the PUC. You know, we both operate under CPUC jurisdiction. They do have backup battery. The challenge, I believe, that was appearing was that those had a limited viability. I do know that the telecom providers are very much aware of the need to retain those services in place. That would probably be something that I could go back and seek some further information on from leadership and get an idea of how those conversations are progressing. But that's very much front of mind for both PG&E and the telecoms, not just in Auburn, but in some of these very rural areas, like, for example, Sierra County, Downeyville, Sierra City. I work with those communities as well. And they not only lost the limited cell access that they had, but also the voltage drops on their landline systems caused those to fail as well. And so there's a lot of work in the telecom space. There's collaboration. We've had working sessions with Placer County OES and others that included the telecom providers. There's very much a focus on that need and issue for sure. But I would like to go back to my leadership and get some better visibility into how that's progressing and get that back to you.
Brandon, thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you, sir.
Councilwoman Mackey, then we'll come to Councilwoman Amara.
Hi, Brandon. Yeah, I guess I should thank you again for taking that huge pole and all that equipment out of in front of those poor people's house on Racetrack. They just moved it down the street a little ways up by ARD and everybody's happy. So it's wonderful. I'm glad to have that. We want to have that for the PSPS, but and thank you for the presentation. It's very informative. I really enjoyed it. I learned something every time I hear one of these presentations. Downtown Auburn is, depending on where you draw the line, is served by 5 different distribution lines and 3 different substations. And Chuck Heiselman's been working with PG&E. Chuck Heiselman of Pioneer Energy, right, he retired from PG&E, but now he is working with Pioneer Energy, which is our electric provider here, the major electric provider in the city of Auburn. And he's very aware of the downtown corridor. State Theater was without power. K-High was without power, which is, you know, our emergency radio station. And then I've been contacted too, just like Matt has, by businesses that, shall I buy a generator and that sort of thing. So Chuck's been working with PG&E and with these different businesses and has been pretty successful. And he's given me some emails about the sectionalization that is going on and the actual substations that are going to have subsidiary power so they won't go down during the PSPS event. So he's working hard to get all of downtown. He's been pretty successful with part of downtown up Pine Street, Baker and the Cake Maker up a little ways up Lincoln Way. But he's been busy working on that. No promises from PG&E or Chuck Heiselman, but they've been working very well together. And so I just want to let the council know that there is hope for this PSPS, and And there's a lot of people at PG&E and at Pioneer working together to try to make this, our downtown, not, they were successful in keeping the power on, as I think I've told the council, at the police station. That's a promise. Our police station now will not be without power like it was in the previous PSPS events. It will have power. And then now he's working uptown and in that area. So I just want to let the council know that without going into the weeds anymore. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councilwoman Mackey. Councilwoman Amar, then we'll come to Councilwoman.
Sorry, he's having trouble. Brandon, thank you. That was an excellent presentation. I really appreciate it. Very informative. Excellent. So Brandon, have you increased the segmenting devices then so that Auburn's can, we won't experience, or maybe not as much power shut off? Is that what's occurring here, and how many segments have been increased devices?
So I believe the number for the greater Auburn area so far is 21. I believe that was the number that I presented to the Board of Supervisors maybe 2 weeks ago. Those are in North Auburn, and then down kind of in the south end of town and the Auburn, Folsom, Indian Hill area. But I believe the number countywide is 21. And other than Auburn, I think we've installed a handful of those in the Penryn Loomis area.
Okay.
So we're really focusing on finding areas that aren't necessarily tier 2 or tier 3, but feeds come in or out of those areas that affect the outlying communities, and trying to install those devices in strategic places where we can essentially make an island of folks that we're able to keep in power. If I'd be happy to, I have a slide in a different presentation that actually illustrates where those are on a map, and I'd be happy to provide that to Amy and she could circulate that.
That'd be great. Thank you. Thank you, Brandon. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Great, Councilwoman Dowden-Calvillo.
Yes, Brandon, thank you very much for your comprehensive overview. I really appreciate it, and appreciate the work that PG&E together with Pioneer Engineering is doing to keep us safe. Clearly, that safety of our residents is paramount for all of us on the council. And I appreciate Councilman Spokley's questions. I had some questions with regards to that, but they have been answered since then. But the weather stations, did you mention that citizens would have access to those information from the new weather stations that are being installed? Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. I can pull up the website now and share my screen if you want to see it, but essentially if you just go to pge.com/weather, and there's links to the website it's kind of a goofy URL, but it's mesowest.utah.edu. It's a partnership with universities and state and federal agencies. But if you go to pge.com/weather, it'll link you to the listing of all the different stations, and you can pick and choose which ones you want to view.
So you said pge.com/weather?
Yeah, it's PGE. There's no ampersand in there.
Yeah, pge.com/weather.
Yes, ma'am.
And then, because I think that would be interesting for residents, since the weather is such a contributing factor to the determination of when a PSP will occur. So, you know, with regards to humidity and so forth. So appreciate that, and I'll have to check that out. And then actually, this is kind of a question sort of for Cheryl, who sits on the Pioneer board for us on city council, but in tandem with PG&E. And that is, I just wondered if there has been any initial discussions with regards to a power generation, you know, a substitute in Auburn, since we've got the PCWA and the power generation right there in the canyon. If there's been any discussions on utilizing that as a diversion during the PSPs, or
Not that I know of, Alex.
Yeah, I've not been included in those conversations, unfortunately. So
okay.
Pioneer Energy either.
Do you think because it's just totally off it's not at all viable, or do you just think that there's been other discussions that have warranted priority?
There's been discussions about large generators being placed in certain areas. And that's something that Pioneer has been looking into, but nothing definite yet. Mostly we're working with PG&E and trying to get these translators or sectionalizing equipment placed in proper places. So there'll
The
be less
microgridding.
downtime.
Okay.
In
But
certain
that might
areas.
be
Yeah.
something, as we, move along. I appreciate that there is more progress forecasted for 2020 than what was accomplished in 2019. And maybe that's
Right.
something that we'll be able to discuss further as we move on through the process. So each year, bigger and better each year, I guess. So thank you very much. And that concludes my question. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilwoman Dowding-Calvillo. Brandon, again, I echo the appreciation to being here. I do have a couple questions for you. First off, 2 weeks ago, PG&E brought forward a plan to our Planning Commission to make some updates to your facility off Sacramento Street. And if I'm not mistaken, some of that is to kind of create more of a permanent community resource center. Is there anything you can share with us on your efforts for that facility on Sacramento Street?
Sure, I can speak to that in general terms. I have been in contact with our corporate real estate folks and am aware of that decision by the Planning Commission. The essential basis of it is that we are looking to essentially redevelop that site to modernize it, but specifically to support our wildfire mitigation efforts. So that's generally the intent. As far as a customer resource center, community resource center, I don't know that PG&E would look to place those on a secure location, such as a service yard or a service center. But what I was told is that the intent of that redevelopment of the Auburn, the original Auburn Service Center, now, of course, it's out by the airport, but I still refer to it as the Auburn Service Center because that's what it's always been. But the intent is to add space so that we can draw in more resources for the ongoing wildfire mitigation work, but also to have space to stage for PSPS restoration and recovery as well.
Okay, maybe there was some efforts to actually kind of reutilize some of that space specifically for making the community resource center more permanent and off the fairgrounds property. But if you don't mind,
I will ask and find out and let you know for sure.
Yeah, and the reason I ask is, and I've had discussions with representatives from PG&E, but there is disruption with the events that occur at the fairgrounds. And while obviously the resource center is a priority, oftentimes it gets set up and then potentially not used, and it causes issues with Fast Fridays or the different festivals, the home show, and others that would otherwise be utilizing that space. And one of the things that I think has happened is increased communication, helped really make it clearer to PG&E what areas of the fairgrounds really were needed by those other organizations. So I just note that for you that, I think that's an important piece of it is not just renting the fairgrounds, but making sure that where you're renting, you're able to, allow for both, your needs and those other events that draw usually hundreds of thousands of people to our community. So just wanted to note that. That's why my line of question, I was excited to maybe see that there'd be more permanent resources on Sacramento Street on PG&E property versus the fairgrounds. But question, so I know that you're doing significant amount of work to do the enhanced vegetation, removing trees. And that often comes with a lot of questions from residents because people don't understand, one, the rights that PG&E has to come onto residents' property and remove a tree that's on private property, but is within the right of way of PG&E. When I have taken a lot of complaints and residents have complained related to the debris that's left behind, what's the normal process when it comes to removing a tree? How, do you take the whole tree? Do you take large sections of the tree? Do you come back and do cleanup? What does that process look like?
Sure, I can speak in pretty detailed fashion to our vegetation management work. So as you mentioned, we have a right of way. We have land rights that allow us to manage vegetation in close proximity to our power lines. The standard was illustrated in the exhibits that we went through earlier. PG&E's process is essentially this. We have contract inspectors. Their trucks typically read a CRT on the side of them. Those individuals are the ones who do the patrols and inspect the circuits span by span, identify trees that are either encroaching or present a hazard. They then write a prescription. They're certified arborists, by the way. They then write a prescription that gets put into the workflow. Then that gets assigned on a rolling basis to contract tree crews. The ACRT rep typically would either make contact with the landowner or do a leave behind, such as a door hanger with a contact number. And we often, as we can, try to make contact with those affected landowners, have a conversation with them about the trees we intend to work, and generally just try to build trust and agreement around that. It's important work, as you know. As far as the debris removal is concerned, PG&E's general policy is that we chip anything under 6 inches in diameter. For large diameter wood, that essentially is owned by the property owner, but there is a process in place where if that large diameter wood is within a certain proximity of a habitable structure, we have a program in place to fund and provide for the removal of that under very specific circumstances. Oftentimes, individuals want us to leave the wood because they can buck it up for firewood. That's very common. But as far as the debris removal is concerned, our crews should be out there chipping anything less than 6 inches in diameter, and then notifying a homeowner of the opportunity to have wood management, is what we call it, done for large diameter material that's brought down in close proximity to a habitable structure. Did that answer your question, sir?
Yeah, it does. You had put a phone number up during the presentation. Is that the number that residents call if there's concern about that debris? Or if you also noted that a door hanger is left. So is there always something that is given to the homeowner, I assume prior to entering the property? And so if a homeowner has concerns, there is a process for them to get in touch with PG&E or the contractor?
Absolutely. I mean, they're welcome to approach any of our employees or contractors at any time and foster a conversation. We encourage that. We want to be available to our customers and putting our best foot forward in that regard. Customers can always call 1-800-PGE-5000. That's our call center. And if it's wildfire related, they'll be routed to that dedicated number that you saw on the slide earlier. So there's always an avenue to either escalate a concern or request service. Like, I personally have a tree that I'm concerned about that I'm intending to call in this week. But the call center is a great resource. The good thing about contacting the call center is that it's tracked and traceable, and it essentially holds us accountable for responding. So I would encourage individuals who have a concern to contact us at 1-800-PGE-5000. They can also visit our website and find detailed information on what is and isn't possible around vegetation management. But yes, there's a number of different avenues through which the customer can get information or provide feedback on that veg work. Most simply, just approach the folks that are there and have a conversation.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Councilwoman Donna-Calvio, did you have a follow-up question?
I was just going to say, Mr. Mayor, we actually had quite a few trees removed in our neighborhood over in Roby Point last year. And yes, PG&E and staff made several trips. They left door hangers. They came and spoke to us, the landowners, to make sure they had proper consent, talked about what was going to happen. And in our case in Roby Point, all of the downed trees were deemed hazardous if they were to remain on site because of the slopes and the closeness to the residents or what have you. But really, they were very large trees, in some instances very large. One took an entire week to take down. But they did a really good job, and they were very professional and chipping up the material. So, and they were around, so it was easy to be able to catch them if you had questions. A lot of us did have questions. So,
yeah, appreciate that story. I like that better than what Councilmember Spokley mentioned about the southern transmission line coming in through South Auburn, since that does traverse my property. So I'm worried that his comments that that's not as good of a transmission line worries me a little bit. But Brandon, talk to you a bit about that afterwards. But thank you for sharing that, Councilwoman. Appreciate that. One last question for you, Brandon, before we let you go. What is the coordination that PG&E is undertaking locally with our fire department and police department as far as coordinating either vegetation management work and/or PSPS work? Can you talk to us about that communication?
Absolutely. So we are in very close contact with emergency response professionals at all layers of government in every jurisdiction. We have a dedicated team of what we call public safety specialists. These are typically retired CAL FIRE chiefs, retired CHP officers, sheriffs, and they're the ones who manage that relationship with local fire and law. They're very much cut in and engaged. I've also, on various occasions, had the opportunity to chat with Chief Spencer. That's been great. But yeah, we have that dedicated PSS or public safety specialist team. that coordinates that relationship. Additionally, we have for our emergency responders what we're calling our PSPS portal. It's greatly improved over last year. It provides real-time mapping now down to the parcel level for PSPS impacts. It provides information on our medically sensitive customers so that we can be sure that first responders have visibility into those folks who are most at risk during a power outage. That's a couple of key examples, but the improvements to the PSPS portal, I think, are going to be very well received by the emergency response community.
Great, thank you. Brandon, again, thank you very much. I will look forward, if you could email me and I can get it to the rest of the council and then to the community, the map that shows the sectionalizing
Yes.
been done in Auburn. I think that's, an important piece and appreciate the continued efforts that you're doing to make sure that especially our business districts are able to stay open, and as many of our residents as well can reduce that impact. So Brandon, thank you very much for being here. Appreciate the update, and we look forward to that map.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 8 here, and that is public art. So we have a couple art proposals that are being brought forward to us. So I'll turn it to our city clerk, who will introduce our wonderful chair of the Art Commission. So Amy, I'll give it to you.
Sure. Mayor, City Council members. I'm actually just going to introduce April Maynard of the Auburn Arts Commission, who's going to do the presentation on this item.
Good evening, everybody. I am not going to be sharing my screen, but I'm looking at the staff report that is in the agenda. So that there's the public art approval process as a sculpture and the mural approval process. And the actual proposals start at page 88 of your packet. So I don't know if you've looked at that. There are 3 different public art proposals that the Arts Commission approved on July 6th and is sent to the council for recommended that you approve in concept. And this is consistent with the public art process that was adopted by the council on November 25th of last year. That is both the mural process and the sculpture process. So the first proposal is for a large mosaic mural to be on the retaining wall that is in the School Park Preserve, that is straight ahead when you're in the small parking lot at 55 College Way. And it is it's a piece of art, but it also does identify the School Park Preserve, as many in the community still don't know that the School Park Preserve is there. So if you've seen the illustration, it's kind of in the arts and crafts style, which is consistent with the time that the City Hall, obviously was initially the school was constructed, and is consistent with the area, with the images of oak trees and woodlands and a stream, and then with the words in a font that's consistent with the arts and crafts style. So this would be created by members of the Arts Commission, and also with helpers at times. We're very cognizant of the circumstances now with COVID, that we're not going to be convening groups to do it, but household groups could do it. Katie and Brian Freeze were instrumental in creating the Sierra to the Sea mural that's at the gardens at the back of City Hall parking lot, and the stream at the art park, and also at the Armed Forces Pavilion, and the retaining wall there is also a mosaic on walls that was constructed by Katie and Brian with help of other members of the Arts Commission, primarily Ryan Goodpaster. So it would be laid out off-site and not in a public space, and then with commercial tiles and custom-made tiles. And the Katie and Brian Freeze have the means to do that at their home and kilns, and also facilities that they can take advantage of when they're creating tiles. So this is obviously city property, and it's there's a description of it in your packet of the consistency of that design with different areas around the city, both at the high school and even in the city council chambers. There's a consistent kind of a design at the ends of the rows of seating. There's an arts and craft detail on there. So we submitted a fairly comprehensive report, I believe, and it was in our budget last fiscal year, and it's in our budget this fiscal year. So that's just for materials. Obviously, there's no compensation for people working on it. It's volunteer work. That is a large mural. And I could go on to the second proposal, which is a related project.
April, let's just pause real quick and
Okay,
let's do each one by one. And
Okay.
for the council, Amy does have the ability, if we need to, she can put them up on the screen if you need to see it. It is in the packet. But first, any questions for April related to the mural itself, the first proposal? Yeah, Councilwoman Mackey, go ahead.
Yes, hi April.
Hi.
Aren't we lucky that we have Brian and Katie Freeze? I count my blessings. We should all count our blessings. I think it's beautiful. I have no complaints about the design or anything like that. My only question is this: isn't the school park preserve called the Susan Cooley Gilliam School Park Preserve? Isn't that the real name of our school park preserve as it is in all the documents and the trusts? You know, I don't know, maybe Bob can respond to that. I haven't seen the actual documents myself, but I was under the understanding that, and I know that would be a little difficult to put that on that mural. But I want to make sure that we are, not stepping on any toes with not naming it entirely what it's supposedly called. Bob, what do you think?
I have a meeting tomorrow morning with Bob Cooley Gilliam. I'll pose the question to him and ask for his guidance on the subject. I'll pass that along to council in April.
And one thing that was brought up at our July 6th meeting was that actually paperwork was reviewed, and Katie Freeze reported that the plan was to add "the" before school park preserve, because that was in the paperwork that she inspected. That was the official name of it, was the school park preserve. So that was to be added on. So that's the paperwork that we had access to.
Yeah. So, well, okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure. I just know that the park preserve was to honor Susan Cooley Gilliam, and that the land trust, put together a lot of the funds to build the park preserve, as did the city of Auburn and a lot of other people. But I just wanted to make sure that maybe we should have her name there somewhere, maybe not in the mosaic, but I don't know, somewhere. But I'll leave that up to you, Bob. I just wanted to get that out there because I don't want to overlook the reason that the park preserve was finally put together and completed was because of the Gilliams and their faith and trust, and Janice, of course. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Mackey, and definitely Bob will look for the follow-up on that. Any other questions for April related to the mural? Okay, not seeing any. April, you can move on to the next proposal.
Okay, so the second one, as you will see, is actually a smaller version of the one that we just talked about, and that will be completed first. It's a freestanding version of it on the corner of High Street and College. So hopefully catching the attention of passersby so they will become aware that there's a park down there. And again, the word "the" is going to be added to the top of that. And that's on a freestanding frame that is similar to ones that have been fabricated for some signage at the gardens in the upper school park preserve, the pollinator garden and the vegetable garden. So same kind of format. It will be constructed at the Freeze home and at other locations if needed for glazing and firing. The the hope is that the smaller one, that goes on the street corner, could be completed before the end of the year. The larger one, there'll be quite a bit of tile to manufacture, and that will probably go through into summer of next year, if not beyond. But it will be in process the entire time. So
Great,
that's.
thank you, April. Any questions on the freestanding sign? Yeah, Councilwoman Dowden Calvillo, then Councilwoman Noir.
I didn't really have a question. I just wanted to mention though that right now we're estimating about $1,000 cost for that. And then for the, sorry, my cat is under the, the larger mosaic mural is coming in about $7,200. And both of those amounts, there's sufficient funding in the Arts Commission's budget at this time. So I just wanted to add that on.
Yeah, no, thank you for adding that. That's good for us all. Looks like it's multiple cats time to get entertained. Councilwoman Amara, go ahead.
Yes.
Yes, I'm just trying to get a feel for where is it on above the steps as you go down, or to the left of the steps there?
Right on the corner as you're going down and onto College. So it's at the park corner of High Street and College, going where it dips down.
Diagonal. It'll be diagonal.
Kind of at an angle, trying to catch both directions, but a little bit angled toward away from downtown.
Away from, okay.
Kind of angled like, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Yeah, Councilmember Smoker, go ahead.
Just whenever I see a sign that close to a road, April, you'll just need to make sure you coordinate with engineering to make sure it's outside of any view restricted areas for folks making that corner in either direction.
Right. It's on the park side of the sidewalk and set back, but yeah, the exact location will be cleared.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
I think that was a good point as well. Okay, April, third item.
Okay, the third item is it's a sculpture that we were approached by Placer Community Foundation. They wanted to sponsor a sculpture, and it was somewhat interactive. And this is, I believe, sponsored by the same fund for Susan Cooley Gilliam. And we had various proposals, and the selection was a piece by Stan Padilla that is, it is a sculpture. It is somewhat like if you've seen cairns on the sides of trails, a stack of rocks, but it's a very special order of the stacking in that it is to represent the strata underneath our feet in this area, so that it is representational of the foundation below us. Stan is very eloquent at explaining his concept and his intentions for this, but he's been on quite an extensive search for the correct kind of rock that represent the strata below us. And it's and there are actually some images of the rocks that have been acquired. So anyway, this is funded by Placer Community Foundation as a grant. So we're basically a pass-through, helping shepherd the project through the process. But it's not, it's city property, but it's not city funds. That is not part of our budget. But, we're, like I said, assisting with the process and hoping to get it approved.
Thank you, April. Any questions related to the third proposal? Yeah, Councilwoman Dowden Calvillo, go ahead.
Yes, as the council's liaison to the Arts Commission, I appreciate April's presentation, and we had a very lengthy discussion about these at our last meeting. One thing we also talked about with the artist was security measures for the sculpture, because it looks like it could potentially lend itself to some creative climbing by folks visiting the park preserve. And he actually, there was a conversation that occurred before my appointment to the commission about that as well. And so he has developed a sort of a carousel around the sculpture, which can be seen on page 129 of our packet. and he incorporated stone and then a really heavy chain to go around it to try to prevent folks, or at least to give them the message that this is not really meant to be sculpture for climbing. We all kind of talked about the fact that some teenager that wants to climb it is gonna, a chain's not gonna hold them back, but it might make a parent think twice when their child runs towards it. Because I think that the center sculpture, April, how tall was that? Was it 12 feet or it was?
Yeah, there's a page that has the actual measurements, 10 or 12.
Yeah, I thought it was 12 feet. And so, I mean, it's not just, 2 feet or something they could just
Right.
kind of jump off. So, and I know that the artist talked about, his preference certainly would be to just be able to allow the sculpture to exist as proposed, but he understood also the need to, for safety measures and again, propose that secondary design. And as the Arts Commission, I basically put forth both of these ideas to the council. And so, we may want to talk about that as well in our decision-making process for this one, whether or not we want to incorporate the safety measures around it. I think it doesn't take away from, sorry, the cat is under the table. It doesn't take away from the beauty of the sculpture. It's a gorgeous sculpture and I love what it represents. I just want to make sure we're keeping people safe and keeping the sculpture safe as well. So.
Yeah.
One thing to take into consideration is when placing the rocks that will be stacked, Stan's going to be very mindful that to not make it specifically an invitation to climb in terms of how they're oriented in place. Part of our recommendation was to give deference to his choices. We don't feel like it needs to come back to us to talk about the placement of the stones or anything else. So, moving forward, if the council does approve this conceptually, and he will move through with onto staff and, the specifics of the creation and installation. Another idea that we had that was broached was the nature of the signage. So you could have signage that says no climbing or stay off or something like that, or you could have. I mean, he is very eloquent about his intention for this piece, and I think that there could be informative signage that speaks to its intention that would also speak to the respect to be given to the piece and would be as influential as a stay off or please don't climb, but I think in a more sensitive or meaningful way that possibly would discourage some people. But again, I mean, the point was made that the Indian in Central Square can be climbed, the fish in Central, I mean, anything can be climbed. And the suggestion to stay off possibly, and the nature of the construction and the stacking of the stones might be influential too in terms of discouraging climbing. But anyway, the last, as Councilwoman Cavillo stated, the sketch with he called it a corral with the chain is on there to let you know that he's mindful of that and thinking of that and not opposed to having a strong signal that climbing is not intended. But I think our first choice would be for it to be installed and monitored and just assess whether it's needed. And it would be obviously a relatively easy retrofit if needed because of the way he's integrated some of the existing pieces and just then inserted the chain as a further suggestion of that the circle wasn't to be entered.
And I do remember that now, April, that we did talk about the signage and, and perhaps that's all that we need. I think we need something. And so if we can have some, smart signage, and then if it does become a problem, the only question I would really have, and it's not the Arts Commission, it's mostly with the grant, is whether or not there's sufficient funds for the artist to come back later and to construct a parameter if that is determined it's needed. That's really, I guess, between the city and the artist. But thank you for reminding me on the signage too, because I do remember we had a lengthy discussion about that, and that could serve its purpose as well. I think something is needed, even if it's just, you know, the signage for liability purposes too.
Right. Always.
Councilwoman Mackey.
So my concern is this, yes, that it could be damaged by kids or teenagers probably climbing on it, but we've had a lot of damage at the park preserve, and graffiti on signs and signs knocked down in the park preserve, and that the city crews have had to, you know, fix and clean up and that sort of thing. My concern is that this isn't in a very visible location, that unlike the Native American sculpture downtown Central Square, or the celebration of the Confluence statue that is downtown, you know, that would be a little more difficult to damage even if somebody climbed on it, because there's people around and there's cameras. So, but here, has anybody thought about putting a camera up to monitor this? Because I'm going to tell you another thing. Our insurance is going to be liable for this, the city of Auburn. And, you know, I'm not sure how that, you know, handles if somebody climbs up it in the middle of the night, some drunken teenager, and gets hurt on this. That would be my concern, because we have a lot of problems with teenagers down there. Now, I don't want to say let's not put it there, but I just want us to be cognizant of the fact that this is a different location than all of our other beautiful art pieces. And I would hate for him to build this beautiful thing and then in a week it's damaged. And it just seems like it's sitting out there by itself at night or evenings when nobody's looking at it. So I'm thinking cameras and maybe a sign that says, you know, we have cameras around this. Even if we don't have cameras, put signs that say we do. Because that's my concern. I have no objection to the sculpture. I think it's gorgeous. I love the whole idea. It's I'm grateful that we have this opportunity, but I am concerned about vandals and damage.
I believe I can speak because I've had the conversation with Stan. He's not terribly concerned about damage being done to it, because it's engineered to the nth degree, and it's rock. It's rock. It's a very, I mean, people would have to come up with a chisel and start hacking at it if somebody's really going to do damage. I mean, they could do paint on it, but he's done a lot of public art, and that fear is not in his heart in terms of fear that it would be harmed. It's part of, you know, it's part of the game. And so he will deal with it. And frankly, I mean, most of the costs are going to the helpers, the engineers, and the acquisition of materials. And so if it came back to putting, you know, the chains around the perimeter, you know, this is not a profitable project for him. So he's going to take care of that. He loves it, and it's going to be cared for. If someone were to spray paint on it or something, and that could be a natural like progression of what happens, you know, with rocks and art and everything, and he'll deal with it. He's not afraid of that.
Thank you, April.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Councilmember Spokley?
Thank you, Daniel. April, I'm sure he's got the highest level of confidence in the structural integrity of this thing, but it's 1,200 pounds. It looks to be about 8 or so feet tall. We've all seen mobs tearing statues that have been standing for hundreds of years to the ground. So I do have concern about that. And I guess that's maybe a question for Gary. With a piece like this, largely done by volunteers, what kind of liability, if somebody does topple this thing on top of somebody else, what kind of liability does the city have for a piece of art like this?
So it is going to depend a little bit on the warnings that are available. If there's signs to stay off of it, something around it to give people warning that they shouldn't be there, that's going to be the primary thing. Apart from that, it's going to depend on who else is culpable and how involved they are. So if there's another private citizen involved that's toppling that over on someone else, most of that liability is going to be on the private citizen that's doing it. It's not going to be on the city. So there's a comparative fault analysis that goes into that. Based on the drawings here, it looks very secure and in its location. So it doesn't look like, if it's designed as it is here, it appears, and I'm not an engineer, but it does appear to be secure and in place. And so I think that goes to the concern that Alice was raising on something being around it that would signal to the public that this is not for you to be there, so that if a reasonable person approached it, they would know not to engage physically with the sculpture. And then if they did, that shifts more of the liability to them and away from the city.
Okay, thank you. The other question I have is related to the area itself. I mean, this is the school park preserve. Has anybody reviewed the conservation permit or conservation easement that's, I believe, an overlay of this entire area to make sure that the city has the ability to do this with respect to compliance with that preserve easement? April, that might be a question for you.
My understanding is it was at the very beginning, it was discussed with the land trust, and I guess I'm trying to think. I think it's the mural that is not on the land trust property, but the sculpture would be. But it's my understanding that was a conversation that was had previously. But I'm sure we would check that and confirm that with them.
Yeah. So obviously, we want to make sure that the land trust doesn't have any issues or think that this might violate that permit in any way. And again, just back on the safety aspect of it, I briefly looked through I'm not a structural engineer, but I'm sure the city will have it thoroughly reviewed. Just to reiterate, some of the monuments that have been coming down are very large, very secure, been weathering storms for some cases hundreds of years. If there's a will, there's a way. I hope nobody would damage it and vandalize it in that fashion, but the liability, I think, is something that needs to be, thought through, whether that's additional signage, chains around it, whatever it may be, cameras. I like that idea. I think this thing is around 8 feet tall. So I thought I heard somebody mention 12 feet tall. And that rock at the top could be inked off. What's that?
It's 10 feet.
10 feet?
Yeah.
10 feet it says for the specs.
Okay. Anyway, those are my comments.
Great, thank you. Councilwoman Mar, do you have any questions on this item?
Yes. My thought here is that there's risk in everything. And, I think with the increased signage, and if we let the school know too, not pointing fingers, but I think Placer High School, the little guy that runs around in the little machine, he can go down there occasionally. And also I think it might be good if there's rocks around it, but maybe we can also even have a path around that and have the sign, have it like there's a clear indication that you shouldn't step any closer than that. I think it's a beautiful project. It's phenomenal. You see it down at the river all the time, not quite this tall, but I'd be ready to make a motion. So thank you, April, for your presentation.
And I just wanted to add that Katie confirmed that Justin Wages used to be the land trust representative at the school park preserve. He most recently isn't, but that at least a year ago, Stan made like a little maquette, a little model of it, and that was shown to Justin, and he walked the site and he approved it at that point. There's a new representative there that hasn't been contacted, but Justin did approve it back when it was first proposed before it moved forward.
Great, thank you, April, for that. Yeah, Councilwoman Mar, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just have one more question for April and comment. I'm not so sure at this point we should spend the money for cameras, but if you thought about lighting, like even at night to display it, and then that would deter people, April?
Yes, have thought about it.
Okay.
And I don't know if they'd be like solar installations. It gets a lot of sun there, and that would then shine through the night, or some kind of battery powered. I don't know the closest power to that site, although it's very close to the box, the power box that's there, the PG&E box. So something possibly could be run underground at the time with lighting there. So
That'd be nice.
yeah,
Okay. Thank you.
it should be lit.
Yes.
Thank you, April. I don't have any questions. I'll just reiterate my concern about the liability. And I think Stan even acknowledged in his portion of the staff report that, vandalism to public art is just part of the unfortunate part of public art, but it is a pretty high sculpture. And so I'm more worried about the person who's climbing on it. And if they get injured, not just the liability, but also their own safety. And I know for most teenage boys, you see rocks and that's an invitation to climb them. So I think, if signage is what gets us out of the legal, part of the liability, I just worry about the fact that it is tucked into this park that doesn't get a significant amount of traffic or police presence, especially at nighttime. So I think the lighting discussion, the camera discussion is probably important regardless of this piece. I do like the idea of us continuing to kind of do some more stuff with the park itself to attract people to go down in there and enjoy the beauty of it. But I would be concerned about the safety of somebody who's falling off a rock from 10 feet high. That's caused some serious damage to that
And I
individual.
do think about all those very tall trees that are on site that also invite climbing. So I think it's unsupervised at night, and that's true. And it's there you go.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess my last question, maybe Gary or Bob, this is for you. But so I understand this is a grant-funded project, and our insurance though covers us. Does the insurance cover should the sculpture, let's just say, unfortunately get destroyed? Who funds the cleanup and the removal of the project?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. So if it's a covered claim by the city's insurer, it would be the city's insurer. It depends on what led to that circumstance, but it would become the city's property. So the way that these agreements are typically structured, and I don't know if you got there, April, as part of this discussion, but typically the art becomes the property of the city. The artist will retain the rights to use that image, but the city will own it. And so it would be the city's responsibility to deal with if it were damaged or if anything happened to it. Under some circumstances, it would be city property that might be covered by an insurance claim.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Any other questions from the council for April? April, anything else to add tonight?
No, just we're raring to go to add some beauty to the town and get the projects going. So even in this time, we can keep the color coming.
Absolutely, appreciate that. I'll open up to the
Something to make
council.
us all
Any
happy.
comments or motions from the council?
I'd like to make a motion.
Sandy, want to make a motion?
Okay, go ahead, Councilwoman Amara.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that we accept the 3 art proposals in concept that are recommended by the Auburn Arts Commission.
Okay, is there a
I'll
second?
second that.
Okay, Councilwoman down in Calville, did you have a comment?
I just wanted to ask whether or not now that the motion has been made, whether or not the council wants to specify that there should be signage discouraging folks from climbing in the initial, and then subsequently, if additional deterrents are needed, we can pursue it then. But it wasn't in the original motion, so I don't know if I would need to make a motion to amend, or if you would like to just make a motion to approve the first 2, and then we handle the third one separately. That would be another option.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I'll come back to Councilwoman Amara. Hearing that, do you want to move forward, or are you okay amending your motion related to signage?
I can amend the motion. And I guess the signage will be then it'll be up to the Arts Council and they'll bring it back. So is that
Well,
correct?
Can we just have a second motion, please? Let's
Yes,
vote on
I
the
would like
first
to move, I
motion.
would like to make a
And-
motion.
yeah.
I would like to make a motion to amend the main motion to require that there be signage on the sculpture to act as a deterrent from climbing it.
Okay. Before we do that, Gary, correct? And we need to take a vote on the first one?
It's a motion to amend first. You need a second and then you vote on the motion to amend and then you vote on the main motion.
Thank you. Okay. Is there a second to Council?
I'll second the amended motion.
Okay, perfect. We'll take a vote then on the amendment. So Amy, if you'll take the roll. Actually, I'm sorry, before you take the roll, are there any questions by the council to that amendment? Okay, seeing none, Amy, if you'll take the roll on the amendment.
Sure. Quickly, before I call roll, I do want to state for the record, there was no public comment on this item.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Councilmember Dowden Calvillo,
Aye.
Amara,
Yes.
Mackey,
Aye.
Spokely,
Yes.
Mayor Berlant.
And I'm an aye. Okay, we're turning to the motion that's on the floor now that has been amended. Any other questions or comments by the council on that motion? Okay, seeing none, if the clerk will take the roll.
Councilmember Dowden Calvillo,
Aye.
Amara,
Yes.
Mackey,
Aye.
Spokely,
Yes.
and Mayor Berlant.
And I'm an aye as well. April, thank you very much. Appreciate your,
April.
and we look forward to these 3 concept proposals continuing to move forward. So thank you.
Thank you, April.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks, April.
Thanks.
Okay, moving on to reports. Item number 9 is our COVID-19 update. Bob, before I turn it to you, I just want to quickly echo for our residents some of the items that Councilwoman Dowden Calvillo hit on earlier. Just a reminder that effective on Sunday, the state ordered a closure of indoor operations for a number of businesses, including restaurants, family centers, wineries, zoos, and the list goes on. Also a full closure of all bars as well as breweries. So some impact there. And then today the governor as well added an additional list of indoor closures, and that included personal services, hair groomers, nail salons, places of worship, businesses that are in non-critical sectors, as well as there's a couple others that I'm blanking on at the very moment. Anybody want to help me with the last 2 that I'm missing here?
Yeah, we had gyms, places of worship, malls, shopping malls,
Thank you.
Yes.
personal care services such as barbershops, salons. I think that covers the rest of it.
And
And,
offices, yeah, the
And
offices that
yeah,
are.
non-critical sectors. So, you know, some immediate, you know, additional closures, another big step backwards. You know, I think that, Bob, if you could spend a little time repeating some of the discussion that many on the council, as well as several of our business associations had on Friday related to what we're doing to support our businesses, specifically related to outdoor dining. So I just wanted to preface this discussion with that kind of late breaking items. But Bob, I'll hand it over to you for an update from the city on these impacts and what you're working on.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Council, as we spoke to on Friday, the city has been working with the business associations and several independent businesses throughout the city for the past 2 weeks or so, in anticipation that this day would be coming in some short order. We've been focusing primarily on our restaurants and our bars to assist them in whatever ways that we can. For restaurants, we have been focusing on outdoor dining opportunities. You're going to start to see actually today, tomorrow, throughout the week, several of our restaurants in Old Town Downtown starting to push out into different areas to provide outdoor dining opportunities so they can stay in business and keep providing services to the community. We are working with independent businesses to convert their existing on-site parking into on-site dining opportunities. we're working with the business associations to begin shutting down portions or sections of entire street segments in order to create outdoor dining for multiple restaurants in any given area. Those plans are all being worked on. They're being worked on in tandem with my office, planning, police, fire, and building. The city attorney has been reviewing paperwork all day to assist in the facilitation of the process. We will be actually working out the paperwork tomorrow with multiple businesses. I think that both business associations are still finalizing their plans, and they'll be bringing those to us in the next couple of days. But you will see as rapid a transition as can possibly happen here this week, and we'll get people up and running and in business.
Mr. Mayor,
Donna Calvillo, go ahead.
just a quick question. In my review of the documentation, and I haven't gone back to actually look at the newest state order, but I didn't see anything that spoke to retail, that indoor retail, unless it's in a mall, is still allowed, correct? I don't know if
that is correct. That is our interpretation at this time. It's the mall only, enclosed mall that has been shut down.
Perfect. Great. Let's make sure I'm on the same page. Thank you.
Any additional questions from the council? Bob, any updates for us related to City Hall at this point? City Hall is open. Is the plan to keep it open at this point?
We will be meeting tomorrow to go over our plans going forward. We have had 2 employees already expose other employees. We had 2 that were positive and symptomatic. We now had another employee whose wife has been tested as positive. And so we've done a great job up until this point, keeping our people as healthy as possible. As you know, last weekend, we made sure that everybody in City Hall was tested. They all came out just fine. We want to make sure that as we see COVID infections starting to encroach in on us as well at City Hall, that we are able to keep our staff safe, we're able to keep the public safe. So we may relook at how we're operating once again and make sure that everyone stays as safe as possible, as healthy as possible, and still get the best level of service out each and every day that we can. Those discussions are going to go back on tomorrow, and we will be providing an update first to the city council. And if we're making operational changes, we will get that out to the community right away.
Great, thank you. And Bob, can you just expand on the contract the city has now related to priority testing specifically for our public safety? We kind of talked about some other avenues, the delays that it's taken to get specifically our firefighters tested. And my understanding is we now have a process up and running so that we can get in pretty darn quick turnaround. So I don't know, Chief, if that's you or Bob, if you could update us on those efforts.
It's been a huge help and improvement for our operations. Dave Spencer took the lead on it. So why don't we let Dave talk and speak to the subject.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate the question, members of the council. For the record, Dave Spencer, your fire chief. As you know, it's been a challenging time. Originally, there was a lot of discussion about first responders having priority testing because we were on the front lines. That seemed to never materialize. With the help of the mayor and some very frank discussion with our public health officer, we really expressed the need and concern to be able to have an avenue to be able to get answers quickly and continue to provide that level of safety, not only for our own staff, but the community that we serve. As a result, we were able to stand up contract with a local lab that now allows us to be able to use that facility to get results within a maximum of 48 hours. What that required was us to go through our local LIMSA, our Emergency Medical Services Authority, to get approval. With that required some additional training for our staff to be able to administer the sampling test and then deliver that to the lab, all of which took a little bit of time. We've completed all of that process as of Saturday. And then as a result, we were able to do some immediate testing for our own city staff as a result. So I appreciate the support from the city manager as well as from you, Mr. Mayor, in getting that up and running. And so now we're in a position that we're fully functional we're able to get priority testing. And so we'll look to city staff as well to make sure that we're offering that services to them as well. So in to report testing process.
Great. Thank you very much for that update. Appreciate hearing that. Any questions from the council for either Chief Spencer or City Manager?
No.
Okay.
So are we not shutting down City Hall?
The determination will be made sometime tomorrow. At that point in time, I will be contacting the council, and we will then be putting out whatever is appropriate public information out to the community.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Amara.
Yeah, on the same line, I guess I have a question for Gary. Wouldn't City Hall be deemed an essential service?
Some of City Hall services might be essential and some might not be.
And maybe I can help answer that as well. There have been a few cities that the COVID virus has worked its way through rather rapidly through most of the workforce, which essentially shut down all operations for a series of multiple weeks. That really hampered the city, the community at large. What we want to do is make sure is we're seeing more and more of this creep in. As you recall, late last week, we had 3 more employees that had a potential exposure to COVID. We're seeing it more and more often. What we need to do is make sure that only the most essential of our operations remain open constantly, and that we start to stagger our operations once again to keep our own employees separated from each other to the extent that is practical and possible, and make sure that we are not exposing ourselves to the public as well. And so what we have to do is come up once again with a new level of what's the most appropriate level of service to provide, and how many people are in City Hall, in different parts of City Hall at any given time, to where we can continue to provide service and not, or at least dramatically reduce the possibility of cross infections of one another. And so when we're looking at what is essential services, I'm looking at it in that broader sense as well. And I'm looking at it in making sure that I can provide continuity of service well into the future, not just this week, next week, but do everything that we can to make sure we're not passing and spreading COVID virus amongst ourselves or amongst the community.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob, for that clarification. I'll just note for the council, I was in City Hall today signing some papers, and every single person that I ran into who was walking around up and around was wearing their face covering. So it was definitely, I felt myself, not my home, so I can take it off, but I felt very safe and appreciated that. I'll also note, just real quick for everybody's clarification, the governor's order did not deem essential services. It is offices for non-critical sectors. So I think there's can be some plenty of argument of what is a non-critical sector. And Bob, it sounds like you will update us on what components of City Hall, if any, will shut down in accordance with the order. So thank you for that. With that, we will go ahead and move on. Thank you very much, Chief and Bob, for that update. We'll go ahead and move on to item number 10, our City Council committee reports. So I'll just go in order that I see you at the moment. So Councilwoman Amara, anything to report? And you're on mute.
Thank you. I don't have a lot to report. I do know that the Downtown Business Association, Addison's going to go around and he's going to ask the key individuals up on Lincoln Way about outdoor dining. And so they're really moving forward. The Downtown Business Association is doing an awful lot. They're just really proactive in terms of the outdoor dining. I was very impressed. Also, I was approached by a group who Chief Spencer is working with, Jack Sanchez and a couple other Auburn citizens, and they wanted me to be a part of their committee. Anybody else can also, I don't know if it's a committee, but anyway, meetings. And we're having our next meeting. I didn't make the one they just had. We're having another meeting on August 19th. Chief Canan, did I say Spencer? I meant Canan. Anyway, It's with regard to the pollution that keeps reoccurring in the Auburn ravine over there by where the farmers market is, in the courthouse parking lot. So hopefully we can make some headway into that, because that's I don't know about a lot of you, but I have also been getting reports from individuals who are discouraged by that. So anyway, I'll be doing that in August. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Look forward to updates or outcome from that meeting. Councilmember Spokley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. SACOG, which is the bulk of my committee meetings monthly, is in summer recess. We don't have meetings in the month of July. But I do have a meeting with SACOG staff this Thursday. One of the things that I've been talking about since I've been on SACOG, is working with them on a regional material purchase program with the hopes to aid all of our smaller communities in their resurfacing programs. It's kind of a bulk purchasing regionally for the 6-county area that comprises SACOG. So that'll be an interesting meeting on Thursday. I'll report back at our next meeting what transpires there. Auburn EDC is meeting tomorrow evening, and Placer County Flood Control was also canceled this month. So that's my updates.
Woman Mackey.
Yes, I have several committees and commissions, State Theater, EDC, and what am I forgetting? Something else, but I think more importantly, I should give you a report, the grand jury report regarding Pioneer Energy. And I'll try to be very succinct as possible. As you know, last year, we tried very hard to get an increase on the budget to increase the rates. And we had a lot of pushback from some of the board members. And this was noted in the grand jury report that we have multiple economic issues, and that's because we did not raise our rates enough. Of course, they didn't put it in their findings and they didn't put it in their recommendations, but they did talk about it in the report. Another thing they talked about is that the board is only marginally involved in the oversight of Pioneer's operations, except insofar as low customer rates can be leveraged into a campaign issue, which is what one of our board members did. And they even cut and pasted a copy of his campaign material into their report for permanence. Anyway, so that was not something that they smiled kindly upon. The findings that they did come up with was that they would like us to hire a new executive director, which we've already done. He started today. Also that create a plan for educating new board members, which is something that's been ongoing for about a year now. The 6 months of rate discussion took us away from some strategic planning and that sort of thing. They never mentioned anything about, but they did talk about, when they talked about how we, that there are some anticipated financial challenges, that the board chose scenario 3 as far as the rate increase, which is the lowest rate increase. So certain members could use them for campaign issues. But the problem was it was not a fair vote. It was a weighted vote. And that's something that I think Pioneer needs to get rid of. Because if we're going to sit on a board, we should all have equal representation. It was 3 to 4, 3 people in favor and 4 people against the scenario 3, which is the lowest rate increase. And that won because the weighted votes were Lincoln, Roseville, Lincoln, Rockland, and Placer County, which was Mr. Euler's seat. So those added up to 51% against our 49%. So they won the rate increase, which put us in a little bit of a problem financially. And now with COVID-19, it's been even more difficult to plan for an emergency since we're in an emergency. But just for an example, though, I'd just like to tell you that we are about 6% lower than PG&E right now. Without the PCIA, which is the power charge indifference adjustment that PG&E is allowed to charge us when our customers go to Pioneer. When their customers come to Pioneer, they've already purchased energy. So this is the rate they get to charge us to make up for those energy purchases they've made in advance for these customers that are now no longer their customers. And the CPUC keeps letting them increase that PCIA. At one point, we were 11% lower than PG&E, but we would have been 34% lower if we didn't have the PCIA. So we are constantly battling this. Unfortunately, the lady who was Public Utilities Commissioner that authored the bill to increase the PCIA is now working for one of the investor-owned utilities. 6 months later, after she left PUC, she's working for an investor-owned utility, which makes this a huge conflict in our eyes. So we're a member of the California Alliance for Community Energy, and they're fighting this. So hopefully the PCIA will be lowered, and eventually we will have even a better rate compared to PG&E. And when we increase our rates, it won't be so difficult, maybe by 1 or 2%, which would make a big difference in us paying off our debt earlier and being more financially stable so that we can buy our energy at lower rates. And it's a long story, and I know I've already bored you with it too much, but we have hired a new executive director, a chief operating officer, and we are doing all the things that they've recommended. And the biggest things that they could think of was that Janine's working too hard, and we needed to hire somebody else to take her place, and we know that. So anyway, that said, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them at a later date. So, and you can read it online too. The grand jury report's online. By the way, they said the board members were inarticulate and couldn't really explain what Pioneer does. They never interviewed me. They never called me, and I sit on the Energy Procurement Committee, and I've been on the board since the beginning as an alternate and a board member, and they never called me. So I just wanted to put that out there too. Thank you very much for your time, everybody.
Are we required, Councilwoman Mackey, to respond to it? Was there any items for the city to respond? And I have a copy of it too, so I guess I could review it, but do you know?
Pioneer will respond.
Gotcha.
Pioneer Energy will respond. We don't need to respond, no.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Dowding-Calvio.
Yes, we had an Arts Commission meeting recently, and you've already seen the fruits of the labor of that labor. The Auburn Endurance Capital World Committee that will meet tomorrow, actually Wednesday this week. We had a meeting, the AAA out at the airport had a meeting, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, but I wanted just to bring forward comments that were made by members of how appreciative they were to have Dave Spencer out there, that he's been incredibly responsive to issues that have come up since he's taken that additional role on, not only being our fire chief, but our airport manager too. Specifically dealing with AWAS. There were some issues with AWAS, serious issues with AWAS, and just they were incredibly impressed and very thankful. So I just wanted to pass that along, and that's all that I have to report.
Great, thank you very much. And Chief Spencer, thank you. It's always nice to let us hear positive things versus complaints. So appreciate that. A couple reports I just wanted to bring to your attention. Councilwoman Mackey talked about the grand jury report related to Pioneer. There's another grand jury report that just got sent to all the cities, and that was related to accessing meeting agendas for public meetings, including ours. There was one item that they dinged the city of Auburn on, and it seemed to be very trivial, if you ask me, and that was just to the fact that in their interpretation, I'll put it that way, they wanted to see the latest meeting agenda linked to the homepage, not just a link to the meeting agendas. And so, good testament to our city clerk that, again, there was only one out of, I think, 6 or 7 different items that we were dinged on. And Amy already has updated the website, so it now has a link to the most current. So the city staff, I know, will be responding to that report as well, and their recommendation to simply add the latest meeting agenda to the website. And I'll just note for the group here, when I got on the council, I had expressed before the new website that we currently have that even I, as a council member, an educated citizen, could not find the agendas on our websites. They were so buried and there were different sections. And so the city clerk has done a wonderful job in the new system that we have, really organizing the meetings agenda items. So kudos to you, Amy. And then lastly, just, well, not lastly, 2 items. Real quick, Fire Safe Council will be meeting this Friday. We'll be discussing the town hall meetings that we had. I know Councilwoman Dowden Calvillo, Councilwoman Mackey were both on those. We had pretty good turnout in the past doing actual physical town halls.
I think I was there too, Mayor.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilwoman O'Mara as well. So if you, thank you. In the past, 3 to 10 people attending one of those would be a huge success. And in one meeting virtually, we had about 150 people watching, participating. Again, thank you to our city clerk for hosting those webinars. And then lastly, here, just to let you all know, the Old Town Business Association has voted in a new board. They haven't announced who is who, but I was very excited to see the ballot. And for every single one of the board positions, there was at least 6 business owners running for each of the positions. So excited to see the results. They'll be meeting again July 21st to introduce the new board of OTBA. So wish them luck, and we'll have more after that meeting. With that, that concludes my remarks, and that concludes our open components. I will go ahead and entertain a motion to return to closed session items to discuss.
Daniel, I move we return to closed session.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, great. Amy, if you don't mind, please taking the roll.
Councilmember Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Amara.
Yes.
Mackey.
Aye.
Spokely.
Yes.
And Mayor Berlant.
And I am an aye as well. So we'll return to closed session. For the council, let's give it 10 minutes. Does that work for you? We'll meet back at 8:15 in closed session. To the public, thank you for joining us, and we will talk to you all later. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.